Hello friends, as far as I know, the only tin solder that includes flux is the kind of solder used in electronics. I haven't heard of a soft solder for copper piping that includes flux as a component. As far as I know, it doesn't exist. So, when using soft solder in plumbing or gas fitting, using tin or lead-based solders, we must forcefully use a flux. If we don't, it won't solder. However, when working with hard solder, there are some cases when you can braze without flux, but only when you are brazing copper wrought fittings onto copper pipes, like this coupling or this reducer, and using a filler metal that contains phosphorus. But not all hard solders contain phosphorus, and some even contain cadmium, which is a toxic element, and that kind of solder should never be used in homes for water, gas, or HVAC systems. Usually, the solder's packaging specifies how it can be used, but sometimes those specs are not very clear, and we must search for the correct information. For example, here it says it contains flux for brazing, but it does not say in which cases. One has to read another section where it says only when applying on copper-to-copper joints. There's the catch. That's why we should check the specs of a solder or its identification code before buying it, and we must see what materials it contains or which are its recommended uses. This is a leaflet, not an MSDS or a specification sheet, but it's useful. It brings a list of all the braze alloys produced by a supplier, including the elements contained in each, its uses and warnings. Those who make these alloys follow different standards to identify their solders. Some identify them with the AWS standard from the USA. Others follow the European standard EN, while others prefer the ISO standard. Regarding the AWS standard, the code for solders that include phosphorus is BCUP, which means base copper phosphorus, and in most cases contain copper, phosphorus, and silver. Regarding the European standard, EN, this type of filler metal has the acronym CP, or copper phosphorus. Regarding the ISO standard, the acronym for phosphorus-based filler metals is CUP, or copper phosphorus. Despite the differences in names, all these filler metals are the same kind of solder, copper with phosphorus, and silver in most cases. We only should check the ID is BCUP, CUP, or CP. These are the filler metals we can use to braze copper wrought fittings to copper pipes without using flux. However, brazing copper fittings to copper pipes without using flux and trying to take advantage of the phosphorus-based filler metal is not really free of risks. It will always be preferable to supply an excess of flux instead of too little, because the longer we take to braze the metals, there is a higher risk of saturating the flux with copper oxide, and if that happens, the joint will fail. Furthermore, a saturated flux makes the filler metal to fuse with the copper, producing a permanent bond which will be impossible to melt, stopping the rest of the filler metal from flowing throughout the annular space. This is how we end up with a pipe which is stuck and has a leak. For this reason, to get a perfectly brazed joint without using flux, we must be very good brazers. We must be capable of identifying the precise moment when to apply the filler metal so it flows over all the surfaces, filling all the annular space without exposing it to too much heat and for too long, or heating the fitting unevenly, blocking the flow of the filler metal throughout the annulus space. There are some tips I can give you to avoid exposing the flux to excess heat and reducing the length of the process. We must prepare the parts very well, cleaning the fitting and the pipe. And we must avoid leaving our greasy fingerprints on the metal. A good braze needs a uniform temperature and a fast process all over. To achieve this, we must use our torch in a way that depends on the kind of fitting, be it copper or bronze. When we braze with bronze fittings, we must place the flame on the fitting as a starting point and get it red hot before moving on to the copper pipes. This protects the pipes from excess heat and speeds up the process. When we use copper fittings, the fitting is much more delicate than the pipe, so we must start heating the pipe with a flame till it gets red hot before moving on to the fitting. This way, we avoid excess heat on the fitting. It can melt, and after the pipes are red hot, the fitting quickly gets red hot also. With a thin pipe like this one and a big torch like this one, the process can be very fast and we can easily supply an excess of heat. With wider piping, we can easily produce uneven heat, so we must move the torch around the pipe to get it as even as possible, so it gets red hot on all the surface at the same time. Well, friends, I hope my explanations helped clear up any doubts you may have about soldering or brazing without flux. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe, click the little bell, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.